At the age of 7, my family immigrates from Zimbabwe to Aotearoa. I pass through customs, but my culture is made to stay behind. In the classroom, I am afraid my tongue will beat back to its African rhythm, be concussed by fear, have amnesia, turn all its memories to dust. Yesterday I was African, today I am lost. Maybe I was blinded by the neon sign of opportunity, failed to read the fine print which read assimilate, or go back to where you came from. I have been led astray, like Eve to snake, like promises of wealth to the prodigal son. I am a child of the diaspora, a common thread amongst my people in the fabric of what displaces us from our homes. Sometimes it is by choice, most often it is not. To be a child of the diaspora is to battle two tongues, be forced to trade one for the other, so much so that my articulation of the English language now tastes like the unbirthing of my country. When I travel back to Zimbabwe to reconnect with my roots, I feel I am a jigsaw piece of the wrong puzzle. Zvinotyisa kuva munhu asingazive nyika ngari yake pekutanga. It's an emptying feeling to become foreign to a country that was yours to begin with. I am beginning to forget the taste of my own language, and home has become just a memory. So, home is a concept which feels somewhat elusive to me. While I'm a resident to Aotearoa, coming from an immigrant family, I'm in a position which pushes me outside of my social and cultural comfort zone. And so, like many immigrant families, my parents migrated in search of quality education and success for their children. And when I reflect upon how race affected me through all of that, I realized that at some point I began to believe that in order to attain those aspirations which my parents desired for me, I had to assimilate and assume the values and behaviors of New Zealand culture, and therefore neglect my own, which were inherent to me as a black Zimbabwean. And unfortunately, that's a common mindset shift of many ethnic minorities. And I believe the power to re-empower those marginalized communities lies in the hands of our educational institutions. And I'll provide you with an explanation. In New Zealand, Māori students are falling behind on every measure of educational outcome. Secondary school level retention rate, school leavers achieving NCA level 2, and the rate of youth involved in education or employment. However, those students who are attending Māori immersive schools actually achieve higher on all fronts, NCA, university, and employment. It's clear that systemic bias and the enduring legacy of colonization is behind this ongoing disadvantage of Māori people. And it is an obvious and reoccurring issue that students who belong to minority groups tend to feel as though they don't belong in an educational context because there are lower expectations of them. In such a multicultural society, never has it been more vital that our educational institutions place an emphasis on history, culture, and language. Because it is no secret that when a student feels as though they belong in an educational context, they perform better. And I truly believe we can eradicate these educational inequalities if we cultivate culturally flexible minds and provide all students with the assurance that they have both the responsibility and the right to be there. A powerful novel titled Decolonizing the Mind speaks of the writer's time in colonial Kenya. It describes how, at the time, violence was a means of physical subjugation, while language was the means of spiritual subjugation. So what would happen is, if you were caught in the classroom speaking your native tongue instead of English, is you would either be physically tortured or you'd be publicly humiliated. And that was a really critical part of the suppression process, right? That the language of those being oppressed was dissociated from them. And what's particularly frightening to me about that is I see these same kinds of patterns echoing in today's society, particularly amongst our Māori community, as they have to live in fear of what will become of their home when it loses its language completely. Poet Pages Matam describes language as being both a tool for communication and a vehicle for culture. And I find that to be such a beautiful description, because language is saturated with history, culture, and memories. Language and words are powerful tools that we can employ to share our different worldviews and perspectives as we come from different ethnicities. Because I believe unity is derived from a better understanding of one another as people, right? So the best way I know how to share the perspective of those I represent as a Black immigrant woman is through my writing. So I make poetry, and I decide to send it to the man who sat behind me on the train last week, who had the audacity to touch my hair without asking. I didn't say anything, which is crazy because I almost always have something to say. But in that moment, like my split ends, my mouth was almost too dry to speak. Luckily, my hair speaks volumes. Tangled and twisted, there are stories in these curls, stories of a mother, father, stamped with a number, marked as objects, sold as property. Stories of my ancestors who were shackled in cages, displayed in zoos. The same way you stroke me like an exhibit in a petting zoo, it's twisted and it's tangled, but there are stories in these curls, a beautiful position of my history's oppression. And you look at me like I am Medusa's child, cursed. I'm making everyone blind to my self-worth, and for years I tried to strip myself of this curse with the potion of chemicals, despite the burn of sodium hydroxide on my scalp, the smell of burning flesh which filled the room while I was hypnotized. At the prospect of having straight hair cascade this broken body of insecurity, hoping to put myself back together with glued-in weave tracks, causing receding hairlines as I mentally recede back in time to a time of my ancestors' inferiority, to a time of no authority, forever believing that I was the target minority. And you can't tell me to tame this mane because in fact you are the lion. And in this jungle where racism runs wild, I am your prey, you are my predator, devouring my history, leaving me so raw that my own flesh builds a grave for me to lie in. I'm buried deep in my roots. And I understand that I may be dead, but God, can you rehumanize the systematically dehumanized? So I wrote that poem about my experiences with possibly one of the worst forms of racism, internalized racism, which is a system within itself in which minority groups start behaving in ways which uphold whiteness and white supremacy and are unconsciously rewarded for it. And in the words of Dr. King, somebody told a lie one day. They made everything Black, ugly, and devil. There are people who truly come to believe these systemic lies that by lightening your skin or constantly straightening your hair, you are drawing closer to success or the ideal standard of beauty. In a multicultural society, we need media sources which accurately portray our multicultural society. Portraying people of color as the standard bearers of intelligence, success, beauty, and professionalism, along with their white counterparts. So, dear racism, I am choosing to rewrite the history you gave me because I know the future belongs to those who prepare for it. And you have been preparing me for centuries.